Okay, guys, so today we're going to look at the different types of networking addresses that are available, both the physical and the logical. And so let's go ahead and get started. First of all, there are three recognized types of addresses. Addresses are used to identify devices and services on a network. The first type is the physical address or media access control address. That's the MAC address. If you're familiar with any kind of networking hardware, if there's a switch or if there's a network card that goes in a computer, anything like that, it has a unique 48-bit number that is hard-coded into the network interface. Basically, it's a hexadecimal number. It'll look like 0225AB, 1A, 2C. This is a hexadecimal number. Uses the base 16 numbering system. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F, and then 10, 11, 12, and so on. So counting in hexadecimal is an uncomfortable experience. But anyway, it is a number that is the first portion of it. It's kind of like, as we'll learn with network addresses, the first part of a network address belongs to the network and the last part belongs to the host. In a MAC address, the first part belongs to the manufacturer and the last part belongs to the host. And the host is just whatever piece of hardware you're looking at. So if a network card, for example, has a specific MAC address, then another network card by the same manufacturer, the first half of the address is going to be the same because that number, that identifier is assigned to the manufacturer. And then the last half of it is unique. So none of the last halves, none of them will ever be the same between network cards, for example. So just like an IP address, the first part has to be the same because it identifies the network, and the last part of that address has to be unique. Otherwise, you can't have duplicate IP addresses on the network. So physical address, that is hard-coded in. The MAC address is hard-coded into the networking technology, whatever the piece of hardware is. A logical address, this is an IP address. It's 32-bit, or in IPv6, it's 128-bit. That means you can have 32 digits from 0 to 1, or 128 bits. That's 128 zeros and ones. That is assigned by the network controller, whatever it is, router, DHCP addresser, or it can be entered manually. An IP address identifies the device's network connection. Two versions, IPv4 and v6. One is 32-bit. It's a lot smaller. And because of that, we ran out of numbers. Basically, the 32-bit addressing system, IPv4, ran out of space. And so we had to advance to IPv6. We expanded the address size, the amount of data it could hold. And that way we can put a lot more information. We can have a lot more devices on a network with IPv6. And then a port address. 16-bit, that means it can be 16 ones or zeros in a binary number. It's unsigned. We'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about port addresses. Uniquely identifies a network application. So a physical address identifies a piece of hardware like a network card or switch. Logical address identifies a node on a network. So if there's a computer out there, or server, whatever, it's going to have an IP address. And then a port address, within that computer, within that server, there are different applications. Like one server, the box, the hardware may contain a web server, FTP server, mail server, all kinds of different servers built into the box. The port address tells the computer which application, which server to actually use to handle the data. So if you've got information packets coming in and they have port 80, for example, on them, then the computer would look at that and say, oh, port 80, that means it needs to go to the network, to the web server, because port 80 is an old web port, or port 8080, or whatever the port is for For a more modern HTTPS, that's a different port. And I think it's 463, something like that. Anyway, regardless, there are a lot of ports, anywhere between 0 and 65,535. Port 21, for example, is the old FTP port. Port 80 is the old web server port. 3569 is the remote desktop port. So whatever port number is attached to the IP address tells the computer what application it needs to use to respond to that data or to handle that data. Don't forget, you need to complete the participation activities. They are part of your grade. You have one here, you have one here, and you have one here. This is basically just some multiple choice questions. Network connections start and end with a port address. Each port's associated with a specific process or application, in this case, web server, FTP server, whatever server or service that allows a device to recognize different kinds of traffic. For example, a web page associated with a different port than email. So port 80 for a web page, port 25 if you're sending an email for an SMTP server. An IP address identifies the node that the information is going to, and then once it reaches that node, the port address will tell that node what program or what server to respond with. 20 and 21 are assigned to FTP. 443 is assigned to HTTPS, so that's the more modern web server port. They don't use 80 anymore because nobody uses unsecured HTTP service. Each specific process or application or service or server will follow a set of rules or protocols. This is a network protocol. That's a set of rules specifying how data is formatted, processed, and transmitted between devices on the network. Most commonly, for our purposes, TCP and IP are the two protocols that we use to control networks. TCP stands for Transmission Control Protocol. Basically, it organizes how the information is assembled, disassembled, encapsulated. And then IP, the Internet Protocol, controls how the information is routed on the Internet through the various IP addresses. So, network protocols allow devices from different architectures and operating systems. You can have Mac talking to Windows, talking to Linux, and those OSs can communicate with each other because they have common protocols. Hackers try to exploit vulnerability of a device, such as opening network ports. If they can get in on some unused or unprotected port, then they can open up from the inside. They can open up more vulnerable ports. Participation activity and then port address numbers can be between 0 and 65,535. Well-known ports or privileged ports are between 0 and 1,023. They are reserved for commonly used services. 80 is an old HTTP port. Like I said, HTTPS, now we know that it's port 443 instead of port 80. Registered anywhere between 1,024 and 49,159. For example, 3389, that is remote desktop, RDP for Windows. So anywhere between those two numbers, that is a registered port that belongs specifically to that application. And then ephemeral ports, these are private ports. This is sort of like a private IP address, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But these are ports between 49,152 and 65,535. The computer uses those internally. It does something similar to port forwarding or port mapping. And so when the information comes in, let's say it comes in on port 80, the computer that it receives it will assign it an internal port number from this ephemeral port group. And then when it sends it back out, it'll switch it back to port 80 or port 21 or whatever application it came from. So an IP address has TCP and a UDP port. An open port is TCP or UDP port that's configured to accept data packets. Closed, on the other hand, will reject or ignore data. It is also possible to have a stealth port, which means it will not respond to queries, but it will accept information if it comes in the right format. This is a thing that a lot of firewalls do to protect a computer system. Even though the port has to be open to allow traffic in and out, they will stealth the ports so that if you just send a ping request, hey, what ports do you have open? It won't say anything. But if you send a request for web information, it will respond. Common ports, there's a list of them. You need to be familiar with these for the test. This is straight off the test here. Some of these are older. For example, port 20 and 21, nobody uses FTP anymore. Telnet on port 23, nobody uses Telnet anymore. SMTP 25, very few people use that anymore. Most of that is IMAP. That's the way we send emails now. DNS is still in use. DHCP is still in use, but nobody uses Hypertext Transfer port 80 anymore. It's all port 443, which is Secure Socket. POP3, nobody uses that. That's all IMAP, which is port 143. And even then, it's they don't even use those. It's up in the 900s. Here we go. POP3 SSL and IMAP S, which is IMAP secured. So port 993 and 995 are the more common. This is what we use today for email. But you're still going to need to know these old legacy ports because, for one thing, the test has a lot of legacy information on it. SMB, basically, that is a network controlling protocol, and it's port 445. Syslog, port 514. SQL Server, port 11433. That port has to be opened up if you're going to have an online SQL Server or SQLnet. Webmail, MySQL, these are different web servers and different database servers. RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, 3389 has to be opened if you want to be able to remotely control your computer. TFTP, this is another FTP file transfer protocol port. And then SIP 5060 and 5061. So you need to know, even though some of these lower numbers are not in use anymore, you do need to know those for the test. Participation activity, another participation activity. Make sure you get these done because they are required. They are part of your grade and they will impact your grade if you don't do them. So please go through and make sure you have all the points. You'll have these numbers filled in and then you can go on from there. Okay, once you've completed those, then you can move on to the next section of Module 4. If you have any questions, contact me via the Canvas inbox or ask me in class, and I'll do my best to help you. Have a good day.